Thank you so much. So we're going to whip on this afternoon. If you've got questions, do please have them in your mind so that when we ask for questions, you can stick your hand up and we'll try and take as many as possible. This afternoon, I'm Bettany Hughes, by the way, if you weren't here yesterday and the day before. So I'm a historian, author and broadcaster and passionate about the ancient world. This afternoon, we have the brilliantly broad theme of connecting spirituality, science and art. And our two first speakers are going to talk actually probably about all three of those things, spirituality, science and art, because they've co-written this book, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. So Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, could you just come to the podium? They're going to do a, you're going to have slides and they're going to do a talk, but they have allowed time for questions. So please can you welcome them to the podium, Ivy and Susan. I think their mic needs to be up. Just while we're getting their mic up. So Susan is the founder, executive director of International Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins. And Ivy Ross is an author, artist, vice president, hardware design, Google, no less.
All sounds very official. Hi, well, I'm Ivy.
And I'm Susan, and we are thrilled to be here. Just before we jump in, I just wanted to say a couple things. Can you hear me now? Hear me now? Okay, good. Do you want to do that?
Okay.
Great. So we were invited not so long ago to this sort of magical, mystical event. Should I use this one? Is this better? Okay. So a lot of times what I do is I ask people to just come closer. So we were invited by Alexandra a couple months ago, and Ivy and I are sort of very curious people, and we didn't know about the work here, but the more we learned, the more we wanted to come. And I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, for inviting us. I think this has truly been a peak experience for us, maybe likened to psychedelics and mind-altering experiences. We have not integrated yet, but we really have loved the conversation and the community and the deep thinking. And I also think the disciplines, there's so many ways of knowing represented here. And I think this is the future. This is part of the answer to what we're all seeking. So just want to say we're humbled to be here, and we're really grateful for being invited. So thank you.
Yeah, and we're very excited because we think a lot of what we're going to talk about we've already experienced or seen. So hopefully this will put a bow around or explain some of the things. So Susan and I believe that we are on the verge of a cultural shift in which the arts can deliver potent, accessible, proven health and well-being solutions to billions of people. You know, and when we say arts, we're talking about quite a range. It's not just visual arts, it's architecture, poetry, singing, acting, dancing. And I think we've been optimizing for productivity since the Industrial Revolution, kind of pushing the arts aside, making them a luxury, thinking that the focus on productivity and optimization would make us happy, but we're not. In fact, as you've already learned, we're seeing the impact in the surge of mental health issues. So as we've all said here, what we're seeking is more transformation on a societal level. So this is a very exciting time when science and the arts are coming together to show, in fact, we're wired to art, for art. It is our birthright.
So this made the two of us think more deeply about the role that the arts once played in our lives. And we started to, in the book, talk with indigenous and ancient cultures. And as it turns out, there are still over 5,000 active tribes. And many of these tribes and organizations don't have a word for art. So, think about that for a moment. We have sort of categorized and siloed this word art, and it's become commercialized and rarefied. But in fact, it's really how we lived our daily lives. We sang, we danced, we enjoyed drawing and writing and storytelling and cooking. And I think that, the more we understand that arts, as Ivy said, we're wired for them and they are our birthright, really changes the way we bring them into our lives. This panel was found in 1934, and it is believed to be from the second half of the 6th century, and it's a wooden panel. And interestingly, as it was discovered and began to be studied by scholars here in Greece, it was found on the island of Corinthia. They're starting to see that some of the themes that we've talked about here follow through. You can see the wheat and the lyre and the flute and, pouring of some wine or substance. And so, our deep histories are rooted in our ancestors. And I think the more that we look back, learn the lessons we need to learn today are so important, and then bringing that forward as we start to bring in other ways of knowing. We pass down so much important knowledge through the arts, and it's really exciting to be able to see that. This is another example of a piece of art that was found by geologist David Zhang in Tibet, and it's believed to be 226,000 years old. And if you look closely, you can see the imprints of hands or the carvings of hands and feet. And I think for us, this illustrates this idea that we are literally using the same tools, our hands, that we used millennia ago to really be makers and beholders. And so, this is no surprise that the arts and aesthetic experiences have been used for self-expression, for collaboration, for reflection, for healing. We haven't talked a lot about flourishing. We've talked a lot about symptoms and medical issues and mental health, but we all don't want to just cope. We want to thrive and we want to flourish. And I think that that's a bar that we should be setting for ourselves as we move into the work that we're doing. In doing the book, we had an opportunity to speak with E.O. Wilson, who was a Harvard evolutionary biologist. And he shared with us this concept that we didn't know about called eusocial. And for those of you that may know it, this idea is really that we are wired, we are engineered to be with each other and to help each other. And in fact, our individual survival, we will pass on that for the tribe, for the community. And I think in this day and age, we don't often think we see that in the news, but in fact, that is how we really are. That is our nature, to help each other, to be in community, to be in social connection. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about here also really speaks to that. And Ed asked us to really think deeply about what it felt like to be an early human. What were they experiencing? What were they feeling? And I think someone said earlier today that the things that we were feeling then and the things that we're feeling now are very much the same. We suffer, we have joy, we have sorrow, we have laughter. But how we address those and how we meet the different challenges, or the different challenges, I guess, are what are really different. So, our species has evolved because of our ability to really have this creative expression. And Ed really felt that without creative expression, we could not have evolved as the species that we've really become. And that, in fact, it's the conduit for understanding ourselves and the world around us. So the only way that we can experience the world is to bring it in through our bodies and to bring it in through our senses. So I just want to spend a moment kind of locating us and grounding us on some of the sensory mechanisms that are really quite extraordinary. And we all are born, I think someone said this earlier, we're born in this state that we're ready to learn, call it consciousness, but the reality is that the only way we can do that is by the levels that we're able to bring in the world into our physiology. So just a couple of interesting things. One is that visually you process 34,000 pieces of information in 1 hour. Over your lifetime, you will process over 35 million different images. Your fingertips, each of your fingertips has over 3,000 touch receptors. So think about that. Touch is such a powerful emotion, immediately interacting and regulating all these different types of neurotransmitters. You have over 4 million touch receptors in your body. Your nose can detect 1 trillion odors and over 400 types of scent receptors, and they renew, so they turn over every 30 to 60 days. So you're constantly rebuilding your system. And we now know that researchers are discovering that we have probably over 50 sensory systems. So, the takeaway here is that we believe that it's essential to come back to our senses, to enliven us and to expand our capabilities and our capacity as human beings.
So our hearing is registered really quickly in about 3 milliseconds. And the way sound works in the body is fascinating. The sounds we hear are caused by the motion of our eardrums, which causes fluid in your inner ear to move. The fluid inside the inner ear bends hairs on the cells, which convert to nerve impulses that travel to your brain. And these impulses move through the brain via neural networks that evoke strong emotions, memories, and alter moods and behaviors instantly. So sound becomes an excellent tool to regulate stress because it can work on an unconscious level. The frequency of sound instantly taps into what lies underneath conscious recognition, literally changing the vibrations in your body. Sound vibration has the capacity to return the body to homeostasis and out of a flight or fight freeze reaction. So I've actually been known to carrying tuning forks in my handbags into the companies I work in because if someone is in a stressed state, I will take out two tuning forks, hit them on a hockey puck, and hold them up to their ears and just watch them re-regulate.
I've seen her do it.
Yeah. There's actually a scientific study being in play now about how sound frequency increases our body's natural production of nitric oxide, which would explain why sound alleviates stress, because nitric oxide enhances cell vitality and vascular flow. Several of these small studies have been done around using tuning forks and humming. So this is interesting. I've been studying sound and vibration as a hobby for about 40 years. These two illustrations are Susan and my voice made visible. You'd have to know us better to know which is which. But there's a science called cymatics that was studied in the 50s, which is making sound visible, because sound is vibration. And so this man, John Reed, out of London, developed something called a cymoscope. And he takes your voice and he puts it through water, because water really amplifies sound. And then he has a camera and he photographs watching the patterns that your voice makes in the water. And we are 65% water. So this explains why the words we say to each other matter and why music is so powerful. The other thing I learned from one of my sound teachers is when we are, in the womb, we're very small relative to floating in fluid. And so he once played for me what it sounds like to be in our mother's body. It's like a sonic massage. I mean, the heartbeat is the drums, the circulatory system. Each one has a different instrument. So we have been for 9 months in this incredible sonic bath. So I just want to play for you live. I don't have Susan and my images being made, but this is an example of just a woman saying vowel sounds, and you'll see the patterns being made immediately. So think about that when you're playing music to your body or saying words. I don't know if some of you know the work of Dr. Emoto, where he had his scientists speaking words into vials of water and then looking at the structure of the water underneath a microscope to see how fragmented they were or how whole. And it was very different when you said to the water, talking about love, "I love you," the crystalline structure of the water was perfect, like a snowflake. When you said, "I hate you," it was destroyed and very fragmented. So we love this quote that Jill Bolte-Taylor, an anatomist, has said, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we're actually feeling creatures that think. And I think this is so true because we walk around in our heads thinking that we are thinking creatures that once in a while feel, but it's actually the reverse. And so in the spring of 2019, Susan and I had the opportunity to put this idea of neuroaesthetics, which she'll explain in a few minutes, into action, and illustrate the effects of sensory perceptions on our bodies in an exhibit called A Space for Being. This was in the Melange Design Show. So it was an exhibition of enriched environments, default mode network, and the aesthetic triangle, which you'll hear about later, coming to life through a collaboration between my design studio at Google, Susan's lab at Hopkins, and an architect friend, Suchi Reddy. So what happened in the exhibit is participants walked into a space and they were fitted with this armband. And inside the armband were sensors that were continually taking in biological information, including body temperature, variable heart rate, and pulse. And Susan's lab and Google had worked out an algorithm. We were looking for in which space, because architecture changes the way you think and feel, in which space your body, not your mind, was feeling the least stressed or the most at home. Participants were invited to touch, smell, listen, explore for 5 minutes in each of 3 rooms. And these were living room, dining rooms that were, had the same kind of elements, but each one was done with different neuroaesthetic principles, i.e. different scent, different colors, different textures, different lighting, different shapes. There was no talking, no photographs. In fact, they were invited to even touch. That wall piece was made all out of felt, so they were invited to touch the art. I mean, the idea was to feel. So at the end of the experience, the guests had their bands removed by a band tender, and their data was downloaded for them only, and of course deleted after we shared it with them. But each visitor received a readout that we did in a very aesthetic way of how their body was feeling in each of the 3 rooms. And what we did before we showed them this is we said, which room did you like best? And some said, oh, room number 2, because I love the blue couch, or room number 3, because I love the music. And in 58% of the people, the room their body felt most at ease or least stressed was different than the one that their mind, their cognitive mind, liked better, which was, we thought this will be a failure if that was not the case.
Well, and it was interesting because this was really the first time that neuroaesthetics was really brought to the general public in a kind of experience or experiment. And this idea of neuroaesthetics, we have been understanding and thinking about the role of the arts in many ways, philosophers, humanities. We've really thought about it in terms of community building, but the field of neuroaesthetics really is only about 20 years old, and it's really the first person that was sort of noted as being the father of neuroaesthetics is a person named Samir Zeki, who's at University College London, and he was the first person that used brain imaging to really begin to start to ask questions about the neurobiology of beauty. And it turns out that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so it's really been in this last 20 years that scientists have been able to use different kinds of biomarkers to start to get inside our heads non-invasively and to really understand the extraordinary way that the arts change us. So neuroaesthetics, just as a definition, is the study of how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change, and measurements are a subjective term, but measurably change the brain and body and behavior. And super importantly, how this knowledge can be translated, how this knowledge can be applied into practices that advance health, well-being, learning, community building. And so one of the things that we know is that these physiological arts and aesthetic experiences change physiological networks, psychological networks, and different biological networks like respiration and circulatory systems, the immune system, the endocrine system, muscular systems. And it's fascinating that the more research we do, we're starting to see that oftentimes these systems are activated simultaneously. And so there's a lot of things that are happening when we're engaged in different art forms at a global level. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, for different reasons, different outcomes, how that might be so. So it may not be a surprise to you that nature is the most aesthetic art form by far, and it makes a lot of sense. Sound, texture, color, temperature, shape, smell. As Ivy said, places matter, and these places in nature aliven our senses in such strong ways. So a couple of things we've learned over the last several years is that nature has a very strong effect on our parasympathetic nervous system, and it immediately reduces adrenaline, blood pressure, and heart rate. And that just spending 20 minutes in nature significantly lowers cortisol, which is super, super important for relieving stress. And this all makes a lot of sense because when E.O. Wilson was talking about the fact that over the course of human history, we have spent 99.8% of our time out in nature, and it's only been the human-built environment where we spent 0.2%. So we naturally want to bring nature in, and we want to be in nature. And when you think about communities that are under-resourced and impoverished and don't have nature, you know that that makes a lot of sense why that would be so important. And to sort of bring that home, we spent a little bit of time trying to understand through the indigenous cultures how nature was so important. And it was certainly important for physical health and for well-being. But there was also such a symbiotic relationship to the land. So if the land was hurt, if the crops weren't coming in, people in those communities, and they still do, feel hurt. They're as hurt as the land. And this idea that land and the connection to land is spiritual and also involved in our emotional well-being, not just our physical well-being. So I think this idea that we are just evolutionarily compelled to go out into nature and to be in nature is such an important theme. And so over the last several years, we've started to see architects do things and designers do things like bringing nature into very hectic, very stressful places. This is actually an airport. It's an airport in Singapore. And what they're finding in this rain vortex that was designed several years ago is that it actually is lowering cortisol. So this idea that water, the sound of water, really influences neural brain waves and creates a calming effect. We know that. And in essence, this, which is a huge installation, which has a kind of a garden around it, also has a opportunity to really bring in white noise. And so it's beginning to be studied, and now there are designers that are looking at airports as vehicles for mental health and transformation all over the world. So we've talked a little bit about why the arts are so important in aesthetic experiences and how they change our body through this idea of our senses. And someone mentioned earlier this idea about neuroplasticity. So I want to just give a little bit of context to what are we talking about when we talk about neuroplasticity. We are each born with 100 billion neurons, and they connect at a synaptic level. You have quadrillions of these connections in your brain that create endless neural pathways. So it's these neural pathways that underlie literally everything you do. So your movements, your emotions, your feelings, memory, everything that you do is really tied to these neural pathways, and the strength of the neural pathways, the new connections that are made, but also the speed at which those neural pathways happen. And so when you're making a memory or you're learning something, synapses and neural pathways get stronger. And we know that neuroaesthetic and arts experiences are some of the strongest ways to really ignite that kind of neuroplasticity. And to sort of bring that home, in the 1960s, a researcher named Marion Diamond, who, by the way, actually was the only person that was given the honor of dissecting Einstein's brain and to really understand what was different about his brain. But in the 60s, she had this idea that enriched environments really made a difference. And so she did an experiment with rats where she had an enriched environment, and for her that meant novelty and surprise, things that changed, different motivations and interests for a rat population. And then she had kind of a status quo, like things normal. Then she created an impoverished environment. And what she saw in just 2 weeks were that the rats in the enriched environment actually changed the structure, the size of their brain by 6%. That's phenomenal. She also saw adversely that in the impoverished environments, rats lost brain mass. They lost structure in the cerebral cortex. And so, these studies non-invasively now have been done in humans, and we do know that space and environments and novelty and surprise really, really matter to us. So this is an image that's in our book, and I think, as we were talking about a space for being, the point is made that, we just don't have changes in our brains. We have changes in our bodies, and it's really important that we're feeling those changes. And so, researchers now believe that we're conscious of only about 5% of our mental activity. So the rest of the things that are happening to us, physically, emotionally, spiritually, sensorially, lie below what we're actually thinking. And if you think about that, we only can pay attention to sensory information that is meaningful to us. We have so much information coming in, and so just the pure volume of the sensorial experiences, let alone how we would process those, is unimaginable. But the brain has this amazing capacity to be able to filter out what's irrelevant to us and focus its attention on what's important to us, what's meaningful to us, whether it's practical or emotional. And this is really another word for that, is what is salient to you. So what's important to you, what matters to you, how something is coming in, and it can be situational. And so these salient experiences enter your body and have an unlimited capacity to change and enhance your cognition, your emotions, your perspective, your mood, decision making. And this works in a really fascinating way. So to control the complexity of the information that you're exposed to, there's two basic systems that are always moderating and switching back and forth. So you have an external system and an internal system. And the system that's bringing in the world for you all the time is called the central executive network. But it's the default mode network that when you are really at rest that comes to work. And I want to just talk a little bit about that. So people are starting to call the default mode network the neurological basis of the self. And it's the place in the brain that's believed to be the meaning-making machine. It's the place that connects the dots, that creates patterns, that helps you make sense of the world. And so it's also this place, and Samir Zeki started to understand this, where it helps you sort of make a decision about what you like and what you don't like, what's beautiful, what's not beautiful to you. And it's really this place where, in order for it to come online from a neurological perspective, you need to be quiet, you need to be paused. And so I think it's a real call out for this need in our very busy lives to have the time to process, to integrate, to be able to bring this amazing amount of information that's coming in to really figure out what it means for you. And so it's also the place where you daydream, mind wander, and really think to yourself. To take this a little bit further, Anjan Chatterjee, who is a neuroscientist at University of Pennsylvania, developed a theoretical model called the neuroaesthetic triad. And this is really a triad, it's, as I said, a theoretical model to help us understand how and why we perceive the world from our very unique perches. So the triad has three components. The first is knowledge and meaning, and this is really where you come from, your culture, what you know. The second is called sensory motor, and it's sort of the physiological systems that are engaged when you're in an aesthetic experience. And the third is called emotional valuation. It's how you feel about something. So at the center of these intersecting circles is really where these peak experiences, these moments of greatest transformation and transcendence and meaning really happen. And the more salient, the more important those experiences are to you, the more powerful or peak those experiences are.
So Susan and I believe that we are all craving getting out of our cognitive mind and into our sensory systems. I think it's interesting that was mentioned with psychedelics, the change in sensory perceptions. And I think it's because we've been overworking that cognitive mind. And so it's interesting because we've been seeing a lot of experiential art. This is a favorite of ours that really create these salient experiences. Whether we're conscious of it or not, our brain, body, and heart know that they're good for us. And so, there's many ways to reach new levels of insight and consciousness and even transcendence. I mean, essential is getting out of our rational minds and into our body. I think, psychedelics is one form, and then we're going to see a trajectory all the way down the line of just places you're going to be able to walk into in cities and have these transcendent experiences without any substance. So Susan and I recently had this one experience that stands out. It's by a group called Chromasonic. It's a cultural impact enterprise, and we're seeing a lot of this. It's a collaborative studio and research lab made up of architects, sound artists, and multimedia installation artists in Venice, California. And this one is called Satellite, and they are having people lining up to have these buying tickets to have this 30-minute experience, which I'll talk about in a minute, that really dissolves the boundaries between the art and the viewer and engages our senses, creating this really strong emotional reaction that enhances learning and memory. So this is this full body immersion into this curvilinear space. It could take about 12 people at a time. The room is curved, and it's all transports you into a new awareness of perception, inspiring a radical state of presence in community with others that fuses art, light, and sound. In fact, I brought some of my team from Google there, and it's an incredible actual bonding experience because it really melds these sensory modalities and blurs the boundaries between physical and perceived reality, suspending you in time and space. So it actually does some similarities to what psychedelics do, but because you're actually hearing color and seeing sound, it's very hard to describe without experiencing it. But their vision is to have these kinds of places. We're watching shopping malls being deserted, and what society doesn't need more consumerism, which we've talked about, but I think if we can give people these transcendent experiences in a safe way, it could be a great alternative. So, ritual and routine are important, but the human brain also craves novelty and surprise in order to flourish. So this is an interesting piece by a British digital art collective, and it's a parade of these extravagant characters, each slightly different from the other, marching or skipping across the screen. And this film is composed entirely through generative design. In this case, computer programming that's used to simulate human movement. But this far-reaching implications from gaming to healthcare, it's a way to visualize variations and infinite storytelling. And I actually think that AI is here to make us more creative. I believe that, in some ways we've been training our minds to be like machines, and the universe has a great sense of humor, because she said, you humans have abandoned what it is to be human, and you're trying to be like a machine. I'm going to send the machines in, and then you're going to have to give all this rational stuff off to the machine, and what are you going to do? And I think it's going to force us to be even more creative or more imaginary. So your brain is constantly comparing what it's expecting to perceive with what it's actually perceiving. The larger the delta between prediction and actuality, the greater the perceived sense of novelty of the experience, When your brain is surprised by novel stimuli, attention and focus are increased and a drive to explore is activated, which is reinforced through the dopamine transmitter. So when we engage in curious exploration, we're rewarded with a sense of internal pleasure. This is an image of something called Meow Wolf, which was a bunch of street artists in Santa Fe that took over a bowling alley and created this, it's an interior with a storyline that uses both the analog and digital world. And they have, for example, a kitchen that you open the refrigerator and you go down a chute. It's almost like Alice in Wonderland. So the whole place unearths your sense of reality, puts you, again, in this suspended state of perception. And it is now actually the biggest tourist attraction in all of Santa Fe, which is crazy. And they're opening up 5 others all over the US where people are paying, I think it's $30 to come spend time in these environments. So talking about immersive environments, I don't know if you guys have seen, but this is a soon to debut sphere in Las Vegas. It's 336 feet tall, and the exterior is clad in 580,000 square feet of programmable LED screens. So when viewed from afar, it's essentially the world's largest screen. And inside, it's going to be a venue for immersive experiences for music and entertainment. And it has the world's most advanced audio system. But what's interesting is not only are you going to hear the music, but you're going to feel the music, because each seat in this space has transducers underneath it. So you're going to actually feel the music and hear the music. So when we talk about that the future is igniting our senses, here's an example. And this Turkish-American digital artist, I don't know if some of you know him, Refik Anadol, he is doing the images on the sphere. And these are real-time generated digital collages of space and nature. He also he's using footage from the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as nature, with 400 million images of flora and fauna that are animated on this globe. Another piece of Refik's work, which I think is coming up next, is where your brain is actually going to be able to control the imagery. This is a piece of his called Living Paintings. So what the person's brain is thinking and feeling is actually generating the art.
So this is a cover of our book, Your Brain on Art, and this took Ivy and I over 4 years to write. And we call it a love letter. It's over 100 interviews with scientists, artists, arts practitioners, people with lived experience from all ages and all walks of life. So, in the book, you learn about firefighters who are using different kinds of art form to work on trauma, and it's not PTSD because they're living trauma every day, and they see this work as self-care, or nurses that are working in healthcare that are really burned out. We've also talked with teachers who are using the arts in lots of ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But in just 6 days, this book became a New York Times bestseller. And our publisher said, this is incredibly unusual because art books don't become New York Times bestsellers. Arts in many ways have been nice to have, not a have to have. And I think what we've really come to understand after having literally thousands of people write us about how the book has validated their understanding of the arts and also their belief in the power of the arts. And so, culture has told us that if you're not good at it, you shouldn't do it, that it's a nice to have, not a have to have. And I think what the book has done is give people permission to make art again. So we're seeing people who have put down their paintbrushes, put down their musical instruments, or put down their knitting needles, and or put down their gardening hose and said, I don't have time, it's not important. And this idea of permission, I think, is really important. Permission at an individual level, but
In the States, people are writing us letters. They're starting something called art date night, where they're going to dinner and then they go back to someone's house and try a different art form than they've never done before. So we were shocked, quite frankly. I mean, we just knew this information had to get out there, and the people that are raising money for the arts based on this, there's a beautiful arts org that pairs up artists with kids that have cancer that can't express their feelings and use drawings to express their emotions, and they raise money to pair up the artist with a family that can keep this dialogue going through the entire trajectory of the disease.
And there's just so many ways that the arts are being used. Someone asked a question, I think it was today or maybe yesterday, about why now? Why are psychedelics coming into the zeitgeist? Why are the arts coming back forward? And I think, we are hungry for better solutions. And I think authentically we've known that these ancient knowings, whether it's psychedelics or the arts or aesthetic experiences, are how we're wired and how they are our birthright. And so we're seeing this idea of the authentic whole person really being the direction that we're longing for and craving. And so sort of to kind of round the wagons here, we wanted to give you 5 takeaways to leave you with today and then open it up for questions. So the first is we have the proof. And I think while there's always an opportunity to do more research, and we need to, this is a nascent field, it's an emerging field in the sense of the way we can understand ways of knowing and how that works, but it's a highly interdisciplinary field. And I want to underscore that. We work with neurology, we work with neuroscience, we work with public health, psychiatry, psychology, we work with sociology, anthropology, and it's highly interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. We also, importantly, people with lived experiences are part of the team and equal members. So it's a round table. And I think that's the way science is happening more and more. And I think it's going to continue to really be like that. And like the scientific method, which is used for basic science, neuroaesthetics is really defining frameworks that but are generative and looking at sort of solution science and citizen science, so trying to understand clear protocols, methods and outcome measures, and really thinking more deeply about how the science is translated on an ongoing way into practices, and that's really sort of extraordinary in terms of the way the findings are coming to light.
So the second takeaway is what we call there is an art for that. So art and aesthetics are not nice to have. They have significant impact in every area of your life, your physical, mental health, learning, flourishing, and community building. I have to say, when it comes to aesthetics, this has been a very aesthetic conference. I mean, paying attention to every detail, color, it matters. But let's start with your mental health. These are just a few fun facts. In general, research is proving that people who engage in the arts were found to have lower mental distress, better mental functioning, and improved quality of life. Music played at certain frequencies, decreased levels of cortisol, and studies show that dancing, we did a little bit of that, for just 15 minutes reduces anxiety and increases the feel-good hormones, including endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine, to name a few. And working on an art project for 45 minutes, regardless of skill, reduces stress by 25%, and 20 minutes of art a day is as beneficial as getting enough exercise and sleep. I mean, what we really want is for people to, just like it's taken years for science to drill into people that exercise and sleep are important, and now we're finding that doing an art activity, whether you're good at it or not, is extremely beneficial. And then the arts and aesthetics also increase cognitive skills. So musical training has been seen to improve visual spatial abilities, executive function, memory. The arts have been shown to improve pattern recognition. It cultivates empathy, story, narrative. Engaging in dance practices improve neuroplasticity, cognitive function, memory, and attention. And art practices increases synapses and gray matter. The other thing is doodling increases attention and focus, which I love now in meetings when my boss catches me doodling and he looks at me. I said, I'm going to actually remember what you're telling me a lot more because I'm doodling. So all of these things that we thought were not good are actually really good for us. And the arts and aesthetics increase our capacity for imagination and creative thinking. It's seen to induce flow states, which can help overall well-being, and even reading poetry, they're finding out, lights up the same parts of your brain as listening to music, stimulating your reward system and your default mode network.
So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's a lot of mental health, physical health, cognitive skills, and creativity that are built through different art forms for different reasons. But I want to zoom out and sort of talk a little bit about the collective and the societal benefits. And we also know, and we've seen this here in terms of social cohesion, looking at conflict resolution, thinking about this idea of collaboration and transformative learning and cooperative relationships. Interestingly, music and the arts also have this ability to help us with perspective taking and empathy building. And we talked a little bit about this idea of awe and wonder today. And awe and wonder is also evoked through the smile of a baby, through a sunset or a sunrise. And so again, these aesthetic and arts experiences have this ability to help us feel that we're part of something bigger and that we are connected to each other and to the universe and to the planet. And so I think it's really, the more we understand also the epidemiology of this work, we're seeing that when youth are engaged in these art experiences, they make better decisions. They're more hopeful. There's a sense of the future that's driven by this idea of agency. I think that's also something that we're seeing. The number 3 in terms of takeaways is anywhere, anytime, any art form. And just to say that we're seeing arts show up in college campuses where there are knitting circles and poetry circles. I mentioned first responders and active military using research, using the arts to really help them. In chronic pain, virtual reality is being used to help eliminate the need for significant amounts of opioids. And we're also seeing sort of interestingly and maybe uncommonly thought of dance for things like headaches at a very sort of engaging and interesting innovation. There's a researcher now at MIT, Liwei Tsai, who's using light and sound to alter the progression of dementia. So we're looking at symptoms, but we're also starting to look at prevention and practice and intervention. And so it's a really, really exciting time. So, so just to go to number 5, you want to go to number 4?
Yep, 5.
Okay, so change your number 5, change your lens, change your world. I think one of the most important things about arts and aesthetic experiences is that we have agency and that we have the ability to be able to move into these spaces where no one can tell you what you feel and what you think and what you want to say. And maybe you're saying it to yourself, or maybe you're saying it to someone in your family or into a larger community. But this idea that you can today, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for the FDA. You don't have to wait for the DOD. You don't have to wait for federal programming. You can have this work for you right now by changing your lens. And Ivy and I talk a little bit about this idea of an aesthetic mindset. And
arts are self-expression. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. And that is something that we all need to do for our health and wellness.
So maybe just to pull out, we're talking a lot about some of the benefits of this work and laying the foundation for this field. But this is a field that is actually growing dramatically all over the world. So NIH, National Institutes of Health, NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, but the World Health Organization, the World Bank, UNESCO, corporations all over the world, and other sort of NGOs are using this for individual and I should mention cultural arts organizations as well. So we're seeing this work grow and grow, and there's really a movement around creating a sustainable field. Right now, like psychedelics, most of the funding that's come into this has been high net worth individuals and philanthropy. And that's been great because we've been able to build this body of research and knowledge. Now we're starting to see foundations funding this work and also governments, national, local level funding this work. And that's going to increase. And the bigger the pie gets, the more that's possible to understand it. And importantly, I think this also sort of marries to the psychedelic field, is that the practitioners also are asking for how to use this knowledge in ways to enhance their practice. What does dose and dosage look like for an art experience? How long should you be doing this? How many days a week? What are the right arts experiences for the right kinds of conditions? So this field is emerging, and I think it's very exciting to see what happens in the next 5 and 10 years.
So we wanted to end with this quote that actually someone, I think yesterday, said that art is our one true global language. It speaks to our need to reveal, heal, and transform. It transcends our ordinary lives and lets us imagine what's possible. And we think the success of our species comes down to this. Art creates culture, culture creates community, and community creates humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Yeah. Just come and sit down here. So we've got enough time for 5 minutes of questions. We're going to be very strict because the fans are out. I can see human and mechanical. So we'll just allow you time. You can maybe dance your way to the loo and sit underneath the eucalyptus trees to meet nature. So hands up for questions. I can see one there, Indra. I'm going to bring you my mic. If we can just get the mics over for the questions.
Thanks very much. I really believe in everything that you're sharing with us here, but I did have a little question mark about the power of art. So art is very powerful, and it can shape your brain as well as, reveal. So isn't art something that can be used to shape society or manipulate society as well? We have actually seen that, haven't we, historically? That's my only, how do you preserve your autonomy and how do you preserve the freedom of the art that you're encouraging us to?
Yeah, in the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And we know that music can be used for torture, right? We know that different art forms have been used to manipulate. And I think someone asked a question about psychedelics in the same way, which is, could you use this to manipulate? And of course, the answer is yes. And as this field is growing, there's a whole movement around neuroarts ethics. And how do you use it, and when do you use it? Hospitals, for the most part, don't allow singing bowls into the hospitals because they're so powerful and you can't control them. And so, thinking deeply about when is something appropriate and when isn't it. And I would also say that the arts are very personal based on what we were talking about with the aesthetic triad and some of the research. So it is probably the closest thing to personalized healing, personalized journey. And so I think we have to think really carefully about it. And the arts have always been used for good and evil, right? Film has been used for propaganda. And I think it's an ethical, moral question that we need to continue to ask ourselves as this comes back into the world with lots of complexity.
We've got one more question there, and then somebody from this side.
Susan and Ivy, this is incredible. It's brilliant. It's so validating. It's so validating. My synapses are just popping. My question is, at least in the United States, arts are being dropped from education. K through 12, they're considered a luxury, they're considered non-essential. People applying to colleges don't take any type of art exam. And my question to you is, how do you view that? And also, what is the relationship with our youth and ourselves when we're using screens all the time and we're focused on texts and not on larger forms of art?
Let me start by answering that. Interestingly enough, Susan and I spoke at the Getty Museum to 500 school superintendents in California, because California is the one state that just, Prop 28, passed, I think, $1 billion to have every single school in California have an art teacher, which is huge. And our plea to them was to don't just check the box, make art a mindset that goes across the program. On that note, we've also spoken to, there was a conference on women in data science, because Stanford and other schools are coming asking us that they're recognizing that some of these kids are thinking that they have to give up, like they played the guitar, they painted when they were kids, but when they go to Stanford to major in computer science that, their parents say, don't take any other class other than science. And these are the people that will be coding our lives. And so for them not to be whole beings and have this other side that is our birthright is a crime. So, there are, because of this book, we're getting, it's like, I think in part, light bulbs are going off, and we're being asked to speak about the importance of this holistic perspective in education, because you're absolutely right. So just as this conference talks about, it's from the ground up. So we are doing what we can, and we're just so grateful that the book has been a catalyst to get us into places to deliver that message.
I mean, we pay for what we value, right? And I think what we're seeing with this book is that there's an army of artists and arts advocates that are now really emboldened. And I think it's the science, frankly, that is changing the narrative. And this happened with early childhood in the US, where when you started to see that it's that first 5 years where the brain is really making those neural pathways, and without dedicated education for young people, that, by the way, includes the arts, and is probably the most potent form of learning, you're not going to have kids downstream. And you look at the economics of it, right now you can figure out which kids are going to go to jail and which by third grade. And so the more we start to make these ways of knowing arguments with epidemiology, with neuroscience, with economics, I think at a federal level that's going to change. But it's happening at a local level. Communities are organizing themselves to use the arts as, I call them second responders. You've got the firefighters and the nurses, but then you have the arts educators and the arts community, the arts organizations, libraries coming in to use the arts. So, I mean, I think it's something that is going to take time, but the wind is in the sail, and I think that's the best part of it.
Over here, Alexandra's donated some of her minutes from her closing remarks, so we've got time for a couple more questions. I'll bring you mine. And who else wanted to ask a question over this side? Somebody had their hand up.
Hi. It struck me how beautiful that bowling alley was, and very sensorial. It seems like very, very vibrant. And I wonder how how being in a sort of artificial forest, in a way, impacts the experience of being in a real one.
Yeah, well, there is no substitute. This is even being proven, correct me if I'm wrong, in hospitals where they're doing recharge rooms that, we advise them to use. They wish they could be out in the real forest, but they have to use artificial plants. And at first my reaction was, oh my God, that's going to do nothing to their body. But the truth is, they're seeing great results even with images of the forest. If you can't be in it, images of it has almost as good an effect. What was in the Meow Wolf, what you can't see, because I agree with you. I mean, but hands down, number one is get outside into the woods. I mean, it's the most neuroaesthetic place we have because it's temperature, sound, color, shape, it's everything. But in that Meow Wolf bowling alley, I mean, I know it was just a static image, but the magic of that was you touch rocks and, different tones come back to you. I mean, some of which is, I could talk to rocks. I mean, that's in the forest. So but it's providing this almost multi-sensory, imaginative environment for people to play in. And that's the other thing. I think people think the opposite of play is work. The opposite of play is depression. And I think that's what's happened to our society because we've been so productive and all about productivity and efficiency that we haven't been playing enough, and playing is exploration. So I agree with you, but I think the Meow Wolf experience is this almost, like I said, Alice in Wonderland magical experience that goes way beyond the forest. But certainly, nature is number one, and if you can't, we were interested to learn that the images of it or the fake plant actually does similar things to your brain.
Could I just ask, so then if being in nature is sort of a primary generator for art, what does it mean that our world is going silent? and that we're losing it. What impact is this going to have on the generation of art, but on us and our intelligence and our creativity as a whole?
It's
I think we're in trouble.
It's catastrophic.
Yeah. It's, what did we say? A meta crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
And maybe just to add, I mean, I think this is why, all these things are so interconnected. But, I think it was Daphne yesterday that was talking about neurodiversity and differences, whether they're intellectual disabilities or physical limitations, different ways of being in the world. And these experiences like Meow Wolf are not always great for everyone. And I think that's important to say, too, that, we really need to design spaces that work for the populations that we're serving. So that's a mass appeal place.
Well, as E.O. Wilson said, that 98.8% of our time as humans, we've been in nature, because that's our nature, and 0.2% in the built environment, which was a big experiment. We've kind of failed. The experiment has failed. So I think, what we're saying is absolutely, and, to this idea of the cube, it is all of these aspects collectively. We have to bring the arts back, we have to bring music back, we have to bring the forest back and save Mother Earth, or work with her as opposed to against her. Absolutely.
Was somebody else from this side? And then we've got a gentleman here. Who would like I'll hand it over to this guy while you decide. You had your hands up before, so we'll get one more from that side.
Okay, thanks. I'm John Soteropoulos from Democritus Research Center here in Athens. And after have been working 23 years with psychological stress and the detrimental impact on depression and dementia, and coming from a musician family, I'm very happy to see the publicity of your book and how it's important to inform the general people, the general audience, about how the important power of art in changing our brain and our health. And indeed, I think Professor Stefanis is still here. There is, and we should mention, that's I would like to have a proposition, and I would like to have your opinion on that. There is a unique pilot clinical study here in Athens when they're using art as therapy for neuropsychiatric diseases. And that could be even, helping for cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease patients. That's my field, so I know that. And this is a very nice collaboration between Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Health. So the idea, and I would like to hear your opinion and your experience from international, is whether the World Human Forum could give some suggestions and create some specific programs that, based on the results we are having here in Athens or in other clinics, that could be guidelines or programs that you could suggest for schools, for clinics, as well as higher education, that can improve our way of thinking, avoiding diseases or also treating diseases.
Well, that's beautiful, and I think this is the right organization to do it. It's the right place to do it, and I think if you could build the pilots in the community here using the knowledge that we know and also adding to it, this is where it's really going to make a difference, because we need these exemplars, we need the examples, we need the outcome measures to be able to show success. And it's children, it's educators, it's also families, it's highly intergenerational. And when you look at learning, you're learning better, your brain is working better, your brain is growing, but it's also about resiliency. So we want to be able to have our children be able to have flexibility and agility and meet the future, meet the present and meet the future. And we also want them to collaborate, right? We want them to be creative. And so you can't separate out the arts and aesthetic experiences in all these areas of our lives, which we have done. So this is the place to do it. And I mean, Ivy and I are blown away by the World Human Forum. We think this is the right group to do it. So we will join, absolutely.
Ivy, do you want to add something?
Nope. Better take another question.
Yeah. They like Greece. I think, unless anybody's burning with another question, we'll finish that here because you're all burning up. So thank you so much. Your beautiful book, Our Brain on Art. Really what you're telling us is our brain is art and we are arts. And long may that continue here and flourish. Maybe something's been born at the World Human Forum. Thank you so much, Susan and Ivy. Thank you.